I'm a co-founder at Ethereum. Panisse has really laid the groundwork for our metabolomic analyses via the Aristotle test, which has been out for a while now. We have recently rolled out the ILIA gut microbiome test. So this is really my expertise in the gut microbiome, understanding its deep connection to our own health, and then also merging this with other omic layers. Obviously, just because we simply have a blood metabolomic test and a gut microbiome test, our first order of business is to integrate those two layers. But over time, we are going to be capturing all layers in the omic scaffold to really deeply phenotype and understand someone's essentially molecular fingerprint in their health. So today, we're going to be looking at a specific study that I actually did as part of my thesis work for my PhD. So this was a very long endeavor. Clinical trials are, they take years to do. However, we were able to get this published in Nature Communications last year. And as Panisse said, we haven't really presented it so far. So I have some slides here. Because this is a smaller group, I really want to make this more interactive. So feel free to interject at any time. However, we will have plenty of time at the end to cover questions and then even talk about our testing, with the microbiome test and perhaps some of our future plans with integration. By the way, can everyone see my screen? Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay. So the gastrointestinal tract is a complex system, of course, responsible for the digestion, absorption, and elimination of food and waste in the human body. It is also home to a vast and diverse community of microbes, collectively known as the gut microbiota. Gut microbiome is referring to the collective genomes. I'll be the first to admit I will use these terms interchangeably. Most people do. But just for point of distinction, gut microbiota is referring to the features. Gut microbiome is referring to the collective genome. We as humans function, of course, as a host to these microbes, providing a conducive habitat to billions of these organisms, a community composition that is unique as our fingerprint. Now, remarkably, microbial biomass in humans is only about 200 grams if we're able to extract out all of those microbes fitting into the cupped hands, essentially. Yet it has been estimated that about 1/3 of all metabolites in our body have been synthesized or modified by the gut microbiome in some way. Therefore, the assembly of microbes in our gut are tightly intertwined with our health, carrying out many important symbiotic functions, many that we will be covering in today's study. In adulthood, when most people are getting their microbiome profiled, the prime modulator of the gut microbiome is diet and associated factors. Diet really is responsible. I mean, there's going to be a lot of variation, but it's been estimated for anywhere from 5 to 20% of variation is due to diet. Now, in addition to energy intake and nutrient quality, feeding and fasting periods are also very important, though understudied considerations. We had done a pretty intensive review published way back in 2001 in the American Journal of Physiology, specifically in the GI liver section, showing that drastic reductions in nutrient load intermittently over time can restructure the gut microbiome by stimulating the growth of health-promoting bacteria, the production of very desirable metabolites, and also morphological changes. So based on that work and some preliminary work that we did, short-term work in humans over a four-week period, kind of getting some pilot data for this larger project, the objective here was to compare the effects of two different low-calorie dietary interventions matched for weekly energy intake and expenditure. So here we looked at what you can kind of think of as a control group. This was a dietary regimen that obviously followed calorie restriction, but diet was continuous in that they were eating every day, 3 meals a day, with some snacks, essentially just following current United States dietary recommendations. The comparison was an intermittent fasting protein-based diet, which I'm going to describe a little bit more on the next slide. And obviously, as I alluded to in the previous slide, we hypothesized that the intermittent fasting diet would more favorably influence the gut microbiota and metabolome than just CR alone. So this was a randomized controlled trial involving 41 participants with overweight or obese status. They were assigned to either the intermittent fasting with protein pacing, I'm just going to call it IFP from here on out, or a continuous caloric restriction diet, CR, throughout the presentation for 8 weeks. The IFP group followed a diet with specific periods of fasting combined with evenly spaced high protein meals, while the CR group adhered to a so-called heart-healthy diet with basically like a TLC type diet with continuous calorie reduction. So in our study, we measured obviously the gut microbiome, looking at diversity, community structure, clinical markers of metabolism, and then the metabolome as well, including both the metabolome in circulation via plasma and the fecal metabolome. So both dietary interventions significantly reduced energy intake. And one of the reasons that this was a little bit of a shorter intervention, being 8 weeks, the CR level was at 40%. So quantitatively translated, this is 1,000 calories off of baseline diet. So, obviously we had a registered dietitian working closely with our participants, and adherence was very high, actually above 95%. But this did limit what we could do in terms of time, except for one case study, which I will go over at the end. Now, I'm going to bring up my laser pointer here. So if we just look here at relative weight loss, the IFP group lost significantly more weight than the CR group. However, we noted substantial variation in response. Bank that for now. We're going to come back to it. And this is just showing you the dietary data, how it was essentially matched. However, by design, IFP did increase protein intake. This was based on a protocol that we have previously validated, a protocol that we use to essentially preserve lean muscle mass as someone is in a very severe caloric deficit, like the one that we elicited here in this particular study. Fasting periods were extended. These were 36 to 60-hour fasts weekly. That's one of the reasons that we had to match calories by overall weekly intake, because obviously on the IFP diet, there were times when these people were just simply not consuming calories. Okay, so first looking at the gut microbiome, when we normally run these studies, we'll include some very broad metrics. The first one that you see here, your upper left, this is just looking at overall microbial biomass. We just do this by running PCR, basically, nothing fancy, tagging the 16S ribosomal gene. Interestingly, there was no significant effect, either looking at time or interactions, time by group. Normally, we would expect to see reductions in microbial biomass with this type of caloric deficit, but we did not see that here. Moreover, and pretty interesting, both groups increased diversity. It was not significant when we looked at the interaction, but normally we associate increases in diversity being a more health-associated feature. We looked at overall community structure. So how much did the specific microbes shift? Okay, both groups had significant shifts. However, the IFP group significantly altered overall composition in comparison to the CR group. We looked at the main drivers behind this, looking at differential abundance. We found some really remarkable changes at the family level. And if you think about taxonomy, so obviously we have, at the top, we have the kingdom level. So this is things like bacteria, archaea, fungi, etc. And we start going down. Normally with dietary interventions, we'll see changes perhaps at the genus level, more likely at the species level. It's uncommon to see things happening at the family level. This is essentially telling us that there's some really significant restructuring occurring. And when we looked at these specific families, the most significantly increased feature was Cristinolaceae. Cristinolaceae is well regarded as a marker of a lean phenotype, an anti-obesity phenotype. Moreover, we found increases in Rickenolaceae, which, like Cristinolaceae, has been linked to reduced visceral adiposity and improved metabolic profiles. We also saw increases in Ruminococcaceae, which has been noted to increase proteolytic and lipolytic capacity in the gut microbiota. There were some decreases in short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria, which, again, with these types of calorie restriction diets is not uncommon, particularly when we're reducing the substrate that's coming into the colon. But notably, when we looked at the CR group, the changes were much more muted in comparison to the intermittent fasting group. So the main takeaway here is the intermittent fasting diet significantly modulated the gut microbiome. I mean, far and away above what we saw with just continuous calorie restriction. And a lot of these changes are very beneficial. Now, when we assess the microbiome, generally we want to look at markers related to immune function and inflammation. That's just simply due to how much immune tissue is surrounding the gastrointestinal tract, so-called GI associated lymphatic tissue. So here we surveyed a panel of 14 different plasma cytokines, and we noted significant interactions for IL-4, these are interleukins, IL-6, IL-8, and IL-13. Now, just to give you some brief context, IL-4 has been reported to display lipolytic effects. IL-8 has been shown to positively associate with weight loss and weight maintenance, and is generally regarded as more health associated. IL-6 is regarded actually as a pro-inflammatory myokine. However, it can acutely increase when we are mobilizing lipids in adipose tissue under fasting and exercise conditions. And IL-13 is actually important for stimulating mucus production by goblet cells. Again, another health-associated feature that we generally want to see occurring in the gastrointestinal tract. So these increased in the IFP group versus the continuous caloric restriction group. However, this is kind of where things shifted, because when we observed what was going on in the plasma metabolome, a lot of the changes were actually occurring in the CR group versus the IFP group. Now, a lot of this biologically cohered with what these participants were consuming. And then in the case of the IFP group, we saw like malonic acid, you see really bright red there increasing at week 4 and still elevated at week 8. Also, acetylcarnitine. These are consistent with the mobilization of free fatty acids. However, a lot of the features that were increasing in the calorie restriction group were more related to diet. So a lot of carbohydrate metabolism related features, as well as metabolism of flavonols, which when we look at the dietary consumption, because they were following a TLC type diet, this is kind of what we are expecting to see. Now, performing a multi-omic factor analysis, we really wanted to see what was driving variation in these different profiles. So we extracted 8 latent factors that were describing at minimum 2% or above of the observed variance in our models. And when we compared the gut microbiome, it's kind of small, this bar right here, to the plasma metabolome, the gut microbiome was explaining a significant amount of variation, about 17%. However, the plasma metabolome was explaining about 37% of the variation. So this is really what was changing in these individuals in this overall, obviously including all participants in this 8-week study. So when we were forming our tests, like the Aristotle and the ILIA, this type of information is really important to us, because we can see when we're going to start to want to do retesting with individuals. Generally, the microbiome can shift quite acutely. However, it pales in comparison to the changes that we can see in the metabolome. So generally, on a testing cadence, We want to test the plasma metabolome more often, or the blood metabolism more often than we want to with the gut microbiome. But generally, 2 to 3 months, we can see pretty significant changes in the gut microbiome. But for many individuals that we're profiling right now, we might not be retesting until 6 months. It really depends on, obviously, the case, what we need to change in the microbiome, and how much someone is willing to change. Now, interestingly, when we looked at these different multi-omic signatures, we saw two factors really emerge, having good coherence or good co-occurrence between the plasma metabolome and the gut microbiome. Really, factor one here, which is on the x-axis, was really defining the signature of the continuous caloric restriction. And this was linked with things that we would normally expect based on what we saw in the differential abundance analysis with the microbes, as well as the plasma metabolome, including abundance of butyrate-producing bacteria. So this is a short-chain fatty acid that occurs from fermentation of carbohydrate substrate. We also saw different features associated with a more fiber-rich diet and also sugar reduction. It's important to note that the continuous caloric restriction group was reducing sugar by about 50% off baseline levels. Factor 6 on the y-axis was more emblematic of the IFP signature, and many of the features that I had described previously, we saw that specific signature. Now, going back to the inter-individual variability that we detected in relative weight loss, we were very interested in looking at why some people were hyper responding to the intermittent fasting protein pacing diet versus many people that were not. And this is by relative weight loss. So this is really, a more apples to apples comparison versus just looking at overall, weight loss by, say, body mass. So we performed a responder analysis. Now, looking at the two groups here, whether it was microbial species, fecal metabolites, the high responder group showed an increased abundance of bacteria more associated with metabolic benefits and anti-inflammatory effects, where the low responder group exhibited an increase in abundance of energy extracting, nutrient adaptive species. This is really showing the resilience of the microbiome in the low responders, really essentially not wanting to change. So this analysis really sparked us in the ILIA microbiome report to include an entire domain around resilience. Now, resilience generally, I know this is becoming more popular in many different scientific disciplines. I mean, behavioral science is obviously really leveraged this, but I mean, this is something that's been around with ecology for a long time. And normally resilience is considered good, but for instance, in this case, if we're trying to cause weight loss and cause modulations in the microbiome, leveraging the microbiome to encourage weight loss, if someone's microbiome is very resilient and resistant to change, then this can be problematic, particularly with us wanting to get someone out of this type of configuration. Same issues with different disease states. We might see someone have a really resilient microbiome, but they might have IBD, right? So including that domain for us was very important in our test, because here we're seeing the main anchoring points holding someone in that configuration if we want to modify it. Now, someone can have a very health-associated eubiotic gut microbiome, which we also have that particular metric in our test, where we want to strengthen those anchoring metrics in their microbiome. So resilience is obviously very important when not only we assess the microbiome, but when we also assess metabolism and someone's overall health state. So we also had, going back to inter-individual variability, we also had the chance to track one of the high responders for a year. This was based on modifications that we're able to make in our IRB, as well as the participants' willingness to continue on testing. In fact, this participant in the initial 8-week trial lost 15% of their body weight, which is remarkable considering that time frame. So they were highly motivated to continue on. So We continue with the exact same protocol, continuing the weight loss for an additional 8 weeks. So they had 16 total weeks of weight loss where they actually ended up losing 100 pounds, getting into a normal BMI for this particular individual. And then we tracked them on a weight maintenance diet, again, following an IFP type diet. Obviously, we increased weekly caloric intake, but we were able to track this individual with all the different omic layers that we used for the clinical trial, and obviously all the important anthropometric and clinical metrics that we wanted to include as well, including like DEXA scan, normal lipid panel, metabolic panel, et cetera. So interestingly, as this person's weight decreased and then kind of stabilized, we saw some pretty interesting changes occur in the microbiome, particularly related to overall richness and diversity. And when we looked at the keystone features that were really shifting in this person's microbiome over time that we can see in the Sankey plot and at the species level, we noticed a complete restructuring of their gut microbiome. Obviously, this individual was under rigorous supervision and was following their diet, had very high adherence. That's not always the case when you have, a patient out in the wild and you're working with them as a practitioner. However, generally with our testing, we do see pretty high compliance rates. And that is something that when we're doing our digital twinning, making the recommendations, we're making sure and we're incorporating in our modeling the person's lifestyle, because they're going to be a lot more apt to follow those recommendations if it's obviously more conducive to their lifestyle. So for instance, fasting, if someone's resistant to fasting or just doesn't want to do it, we can give them a protocol like that, but if they're not going to follow it, it's not really going to be doing very much for them, right? But with the microbiome, going back to this particular participant's configuration, we saw increases in some very important microbes, including at the top, you can see Akkermansia and Mucinophilia. So relating back to what I said about mucus production, this is actually one of the key features that we have on the Alia microbiome test, actually in our probiotic panel, because now this is actually available as a commercial probiotic. However, we do know that it does exist in a healthy microbiome. So these are levels that we want to assess to see not only if someone's microbiome is going to be amenable to grafting with that particular probiotic, but what their capacity is for mucus production, another metric that we have in the ilia. The reason that mucus is so important and that we want to encourage healthy production, not obviously overproduction, which is another issue in itself. But essentially, this is what's buffering luminal contents from coming into contact with epithelial cells, sparking inflammation cascades, producing endotoxins that are, if there's compromises in tight junction proteins and there's gut permeability, these highly pro-inflammatory molecules can enter into circulation, interact with the liver, and cause meta-inflammation. So we want to have very healthy mucus production. And these are the things that we were noting in this particular individual, as well as what we were detecting in the fecal metabolome with these different glycoproteins, as well as reductions in products that we don't normally want to see, like here I have in this figure at the bottom here, cadaverine. So cadaverine generally is a result of purification. The name came from where you think it did, right? Cadaver. These are basically producing a product of fermentation that we don't want occurring in the gut microbiome. We also saw positive changes in overall metabolism, not only in the fecal metabolome, but also in the plasma metabolome, showing healthier generation of bile, for instance, we know is a very important conditioning agent in the microbiome, different micronutrients, and overall global metabolism related to basically handling proteins better, producing B vitamins, handling carbohydrates better. These were sustained over a year-long period. So again, it's a case study, so you have to take this with a grain of salt. But this is how we're generally approaching our testing. This is where I think medicine is really shifting anyway, when we're really using N of 1 trials, kind of trying getting away from these standardized RCTs. Not that they haven't offered a nice bedrock for us to work off of, but we're currently actually working on a submission to X Prize using these types of N of 1 studies, which are a lot more dynamic. They're a lot more person focused, essentially precision medicine. So this provided us some excellent points to add into our testing, and then also take a more personalized approach with how we're doing, working with our clients, and also doing follow-up testing, which of course is something that we really want to do with our multi-omic testing. So with that, I know we have plenty of time, so it's a little scattershot. There's a lot here. I didn't want to go too deeply into any one domain because I did want to leave some time for questions, but we know that the nutritional environment is very important. We talk about the microbiome, perhaps, beyond potent pharmaceuticals that we shouldn't be taking on a continual basis anyway, like antibiotics. Perhaps it's the most potent modulator of the microbiome, because really it's creating ecological niches that can support symbiotic microbial communities and healthy interactions with us, the host. So when we talk about the microbiome, really we want to think about it at a community level. That's why these analyses are very complex, and we want to pull in a lot of different ecological metrics. A lot of testing out on the market currently is kind of univariate in that, okay, we're looking at, this particular microbe, or we're looking at this particular panel of microbes. Really, you want to look at things holistically. You want to look at your dysbiotic index. You want to look at community diversity. And really, you want to look at functionality, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. You can have a certain microbiome composition, but what are the microbes doing? When I send you the mock test, or the demo test, you can look at those different domains, and I'm happy to answer any questions, Sharon, that you have in relation to that. So with that, I'll end it. And I don't know if Panise has to jump off or if he already jumped off. So I think I'm the host now. So yeah, if you want to unmute yourself, happy to go over any questions. And the test itself, we might have, we might end a little early. I know we're going to end here at the half-hour mark, but yeah, happy to field any questions.
I'll go ahead and fire one off for you,
Sure.
Alex. When it comes to the microbial metagenome and human health, a lot of clinicians, especially those in private practice, think this is kind of like a black box for like functional GI testing and that kind of stuff. Like
Sure.
where do you see this where do you see this field going in terms of clinical applications, primary care doc in the community, with patients coming in for just a generalized abdominal complaint? When it comes to how I think about this is, the primary care doc's really going to want something that they can attach like a CPT or an ICD-10 code to,
Yeah.
and get a reimbursable test. I know that DSL and I think Genova have DSL has their GI maps test, I believe, which is the microbiome metabolomics test from their end. And I think that there's a way to get reimbursed for this test, but how do you think about this?
There's a couple ways to think about it. Number one, if you have a very specific issue, I can see more application for like a specific domain. For instance, on our test, we have a pathogen and parasite panel. So for instance, if a physician suspects there might be a specific pathogen or a specific parasite, obviously there's going to be, that test is going to be warranted. I really believe that, in testing someone, in an ideal world, if money wasn't an issue, we would be performing a global omics test on someone just to get an understanding of how they're doing overall. And then we can direct focus on different domains that they might be underperforming or not optimized in. I think ultimately where the microbiome is going to be most useful, and, I know the coding issue and insurance is on everyone's mind and certainly on ours, but I think it's really tying it to the host. That's how I feel like we're going to get an in. So I feel like the multi-omic integration Our starting point, just because we have these tests available, is with the blood metabolome. Um, that's a no-brainer, right? Because then we can start seeing co-occurrence patterns, whether we're looking at maybe there's some dysregulation in the gut-liver axis, or even more distal in the gut-brain axis. We really have to tie it to host health, I think, to make it more that it's not clinically relevant, but to have that clinical relevance click in the physician's mind, and then obviously, in the insurance company's mind. Sharon, did you have any questions? I see you're unmuted.
Um,
Not that I'm putting you on the spot in any way.
no, I'm still integrating a lot. So I think just a 60-second summary, I'm really amazed. So having started the stuff in the 90s before, and to me, part of the things is I ordered all these stool tests and there really wasn't any good evidence as how to actually modify it. So
Mhm.
I think, yeah, I can measure all this stuff, but what are the lifestyle interventions? What are the interventions that actually lead to change?
Right.
So I'm really loving your presentation because I'd you know, kind of knew that fasting would change it, but to have data, there's two things that I'm taking away as one of these precursors to functional medicine. And that's why I'm really excited to have this data. And Vishal, the idea of precision medicine. So one, proof of how to change it for the better, and that we've done that. And number two, I really love the N of ones. So as a primary care provider, that is where I've spent thousands of hours, is listening to the stories of N of one. So the fact, and having been in academics with everyone fascinated with, the systemic reviews and the meta-analysis, I'm like, that is not useful for where I'm operating. So I am also a big fan of the N of one, because that's really where a lot of the work happens. So
Yeah, I mean, we know how much variance we observe in the microbiome. Obviously, the genome is another thing we can bring up, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, this is in our minds, this is the way that things are going to be moving forward in the future. So it's nice to be involved with that. The lifestyle interventions, I mean, based on our scope of practice, simply being PhDs, we're the poor, hungry doctors. We're not the MDs. We're not the money doctors. But we have to be careful with our recommendations currently. Pharmaceuticals, obviously is something that we're very interested in exploring, particularly in the case of the microbiome. A domain that I'm working on right now is getting intake data from the patient, seeing their list of medications. Obviously, it has to be fairly granular, including, dosage schedule, amount, et cetera, but how that is affecting the microbiome, because a lot of these oral drugs are interacting and getting metabolized by the microbes before they're absorbed. So to your earlier question, Vishal, that's another really important area, I think, of clinical utility, is seeing the microbial interactions with the pharmacology, basically. So, I mean, there's a lot of different directions. I know companies can get kind of niche. The way that we've approached the ILIA currently is to be a more expansive, it is a bit more expensive, but it's a lot more expansive, capturing many of these important domains. Again, for the physician, if you want to go down a rabbit hole in a particular domain, you can. And obviously, there's additional testing that you can get to, help you inform the right interventions. But as I said before, I think, getting these initial profiles on someone, whether we're looking at the microbiome or the blood metabolome, to us, I mean, we want to be more on the preventative side. So I think this is giving us in the black box sense, like we're illuminating a lot more, taking this multi-omic approach than I think what is a lot of other tests are currently offering.
Great.
Yeah. Uh, did anyone have any other questions? If you would like, I can send you the publication, and Sharon, I'll send you the report for you to look at.
Great. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you. More great work, Alex. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much for the presentation and continuing to do great work in this field. And yeah, and thanks for being part of our organization too.
Yeah, I'm very humbled by you wanting me to be involved, and I'm really excited for what you guys are doing. I think you're in the prime position, and we really want to see you guys be successful. So we'll support you as much as we can.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone else, for your time.
Okay. Adriana, did you have a question?
Alex, I'm so sorry. I had a patient had to
Oh,
jump
that's
off and
okay.
just joined in. Is my internet unstable also?
Yeah, I don't see any interruptions.
Okay, cool. I have two questions. One, as far as the Iliad test, can you clarify something for us? When we get a test from you, unless we open it, how good is that test still? What's the expiration?
You
I
mean
was
like,
given 60 days. I want to make sure that I
oh,
understood
I see what you're
correctly.
saying.
What does
Yeah.
that
You want to make sure, yeah. So when
yeah.
you put when you provide the aliquot, the sample in
Okay.
the actual stabilizing chemistry,
Okay.
60 days is advised. But if you just have the kit, it's good for quite a while.
Okay, wonderful. And Alex, if I understood from our past conversations with Eliad, we're going to have also targeted recommendations based on kind of what you just shared with us here. I'm not sure if you commented on that towards the second part of this meeting.
Absolutely, yes. You will have a full digital twinning recommendation extending from 2 to 3 pages. So there's a lot there. They're actually ranked by impact in terms of how impactful it's going to be for the specific domain we're addressing. So the way that I kind of describe it for our practitioners is not that you want to view it as an a la carte menu, but we're not recommending that you do everything, but this is showing you what you can do if you so choose.
Amazing. And one more thing, and that is when are we when are you predicting maybe ETA on marrying both metabolomics and microbiome in terms of digital twinning and recommendations, targeted recommendations?
This is our main R&D item right now. We're actually working on it and have been for quite some time. We suspect that well, at least I can't commit to it being out on the market, but we will have a functional multiomic test this quarter.
Oh, that's good. That's really, really good. So if you need beta testers, I'm going to put my name out there, okay?
So absolutely, yeah, we'll definitely keep you in mind. The only thing I want to make mention that's very important that we need to make sure that if we're going to work with our physicians, there is an important temporal aspect here. The two samples, the blood and the stool, need to be collected in close proximity to each other. What we're advocating basically is 48 to 72 hours. So obviously, if we're gonna be doing co-occurrence integration, they have to be, as you know, as scientists, they have to be close. They have to be captured close together.
Of course. And I promise my last one, really, the fact that we can pick your brain is such a treat. My question has to do with your study. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, and I had to hop off, so I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
You mentioned multi-omics factorial analysis. Besides metabolomics and microbiome, was there anything else like proteomics? Was there anything else that was included?
So we did not do proteomics, transcriptomics, genomics in this test. It was clinical markers. So we did inflammation, cytokines. I don't know if you're on when I went over that. We did obviously the microbiome, and then we did fecal and plasma metabolomics.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, we
Okay.
did not capture those other layers.
Okay, wonderful. Alex, thank you so much. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. This is super, super great.
Great. Well, I'm going to end it here. I really appreciate everyone's time, and we look forward to seeing you guys soon again.
Thank you. Nice meeting everybody.
Nice
Bye.
to meet you.
Thank you.
This is lovely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.